What's on your radar, Batya?
Well, the chaos surrounding whether California Congressman Kevin McCarthy would achieve the votes necessary to become Speaker of the House finally ended late Friday night in victory for McCarthy. It took 15 ballot counts for the small faction of Republicans who opposed McCarthy to finally vote for him, or vote present, which enabled him to win the speakership after a week of obstruction. The liberal media seemed intent on casting the opposition to McCarthy as coming from the MAGA wing of the GOP, but this was obviously wrong. America First stalwarts like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Jim Jordan were firmly in McCarthy's camp from day one, as was former President Trump himself. And none of the demands of the holdouts seemed like things you could call part of the America First platform. No one seemed to be saying that in order to earn their vote, McCarthy needed to commit to securing the southern border, for example, or to commit to ending the blank check to Ukraine, something he'd promised before the midterm elections. Others, especially in the obstructor's own party, cast the rebels' refusal to vote for McCarthy as indefensible, the outgrowth of personal animus and attention-seeking. And there was ample evidence for this view. The first candidate to put forth as an alternative to McCarthy, Andy Biggs, was nominated in a speech by Arizona Congressman Paul Gosar that lasted less than a minute, much of which was taken up by repetitions of the phrase, "Washington is broken."
America knows that Washington is broken. The power doesn't reside in the Speaker. It doesn't in the majority leader, nor the minority leader, nor the whips. The power resides in we, the people. The people entrusted us here, each individual member, to represent their district, their state, and the federal government. Washington's broken. We're the last ones to know. A wise person once told me, good process builds good policy, builds good politics. We got to return to that. It is with that I place the name of my friend and colleague from Arizona, Andy Biggs, for Speaker of the House. Thank you.
So not much to sink your teeth into by way of substantive demands there, which is why I and so many others initially greeted the rebel faction with some amount of skepticism. But get to say something I love saying, I was wrong. Things started to shift when Texas Congressman Chip Roy stunned the House by nominating Florida Congressman Byron Donalds on day 3 of the Speaker saga on the 4th ballot count. Now, Donalds is black, which meant that his nomination joined the Democrats' unanimous pick to lead their party, New York Democratic Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, to make it the first time 2 black men had been selected to lead their respective parties. It was something Roy pointed out in his nomination speech, to a standing ovation by both parties.
Here we are, and for the first time in history, there have been 2 black Americans placed into the nomination for Speaker of the House.
In other words, what had started as far-right dissent within the Republican Party had suddenly brought the two parties closer together, stealing the Democrats' historic limelight in nominating Jeffries and sharing the glory of this historic moment. Now, historic moments like this do matter, representation matters, and Black Americans deserve to have a choice between 2 parties like every other American. So it's really important and moving when Republicans choose to get behind Black leaders. But Roy took it beyond identity politics. He mentioned specific issues he thought Donalds would lead better at. And those items included things that are genuinely important and genuinely America first. Rather than just platitudes about Washington being broken, Roy explained why a change in leadership was important and why resistance to McCarthy was important, specifically in the name of debate. Watch.
We should be in here having this kind of a conversation with this many people in the room about Ukraine. And we should debate the merits, and we should debate the ups and downs of being involved. We should debate the $45 billion. We should debate whether it should be more or less. We should debate whether it should be paid for. We should debate what the result we should demand. The only way you're going to get that is if you change the rules and have the leadership to advance the rules to make sure that we can do that.
This was the first time that endless funding for forever wars came up explicitly in the speaker drama. And Roy was indisputably right. We should be having a debate on Ukraine and the $45 billion we sent over there. There is certainly no consensus for that among the American people. The consensus for it in Congress was born out of how leaders like Nancy Pelosi wielded their power, squashing even the half-hearted attempt by progressive lawmakers to voice even the tiniest level of dissent. If the conditions that the holdouts were stipulating were truly focused on elevating debate and enshrining a way to combat the deadly neoliberal consensus, then I have to admit I was wrong. Those were things worth holding out for. And indeed, when a list of concessions McCarthy had acceded to emerged after the 15th ballot, many of the items were undeniably good for our nation, whatever side of the aisle you happen to be on. McCarthy agreed to create a church committee to investigate the weaponization of the FBI against U.S. citizens, something anybody who cares about civil liberties should be happy to see. He also agreed to give members at least 72 hours to review bills before they come to the floor for a vote. And he agreed to more single-issue, narrow bills instead of the omnibus behemoths we've become accustomed to. These are undeniably good reforms that will make it much more likely for things to move in Congress, and it will almost certainly increase bipartisanship. And McCarthy also agreed to a Texas border plan and an end to all COVID mandates and fundings, things that are incredibly important to the American people. These are huge wins and a true humbling for progressives who have failed to wield their power in this way, as Brianna has been pointing out all week. There were, of course, other concessions, including that any member can fire McCarthy on his or her own, and more Freedom Caucus representatives will be seated on committees. McCarthy also agreed to tie any raising of the debt ceiling to cuts in spending. But the final list is full of important wins for democracy that were only there because of the stubborn willingness of a few members of Congress to face down the ire of 400 colleagues and the entire media establishment, myself, unfortunately, in the beginning included. Judging by the speeches of the new House majority and House minority leaders, the relief that the concession of the rebels brought is already softening the divide between the parties. In his speech, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries focused on the power of diversity, the wealth of opportunity in America, and working together to find common ground, quote, whenever and wherever possible.
America, truly a land of opportunity. Government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So on this first day, let us commit to the American dream, a dream that promises that if you work hard and play by the rules, you should be able to provide a comfortable living for yourself and for your family, educate your children, purchase a home, and one day retire with grace and dignity. Let us commit on this first day to lift up the American dream for every single person in this nation. What direction will we choose? On this first day, I do not pretend to answer that question on behalf of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. But we do extend our hand of partnership to you and want to make clear that we extend and intend to try to find common ground whenever and wherever possible on behalf of the American people. Not as Democrats, not as Republicans, not as independents, but as Americans.
You just love to hear it. And his speech was greeted with applause and Democrats on their feet chanting USA. Then, after greeting Jeffries with a hug, McCarthy went on to speak about transparency, public debate, hearings on the border, and a select committee to investigate offshoring jobs to China. But he spent the second half of his speech on similar themes to Jeffries: diversity, inclusivity, and honoring President Lincoln's legacy, building bridges across the aisle.
This moment calls for restoring trust within our country and with each other. In that spirit, I will work with anyone and everyone who shares our passion to deliver a better future for the nation. I hope you'll join me. As a Congress, we can only operate if we cooperate. My door will be open. I'd like you to come by. If we let everybody in the boat, if we row in the same cadence together, there is no obstacle this body can overcome for this nation.
The similarity between Jeffrey's speech and McCarthy's was pretty astonishing to me anyway, delivered by a week of raucous debate and dissent. What started out looking like dissent for its own sake ended up bringing the Republicans and Democrats closer together around the values this great nation was founded on than they have been in recent history and perhaps ever. In other words, what we were treated to last week was a true example of e pluribus unum, from the many, one. So, Robbie, I hope you'll forgive my slightly Pollyanna-ish reading of the events of last week, but I really think that I saw this wrong. You know, I started out the week thinking that, you know, where is the policy demand? Where is the America First demand? Where are the things that the American people would want to see? And I ended up the week, especially looking at that list of concessions, thinking, what an achievement. And you know what? It just took a week. It didn't take, months. It didn't take a year. It took a week. And they achieved quite a few goals that I think most Americans will be very happy to see. So I really shifted how I saw the dissent. How were you thinking about things?
Well, I think the reason some people, including a lot of people in conservative media, they were so frustrated with the effort to thwart McCarthy because when they were talking about him, by they, I mean Matt Gaetz, Lauren Boebert, et cetera, it seemed very personal and very anti-McCarthy himself. And I think a lot of people had a hard time saying, what's so bad about McCarthy compared to any other Republican leader? Saying, well, he's captured by Wall Street. Is that not true of the others? It seemed very personal, and that was hard to relate to. But you're absolutely right that under that surface of kind of a personal conflict, there was every reason to hold out and to push for reforms that will hopefully allow actual debates in the House on issues like funding for Ukraine, like anything. We interviewed Justin Amash, former congressman from Michigan, on the show last week, and he said the same thing. Despite not having any personal real preference for not McCarthy versus someone else, he was like, look, the role of the speaker has just become so autocratic over the last 10 years. So it would be great to get on paper those reforms that will make the House just fulfill its function more readily to the American people of having actual democracy take place. And it was so gross to have the mainstream media condemning that as embarrassing, when it's embarrassing for legislators to try to claw back some ability to actually debate policy issues in the House. So that's not, maybe that's embarrassing to the mainstream media, but to no one else finds that distasteful. And the whole circus of the thing, yes, it was entertaining. It was a bit of a circus. It lasted 1 week. We're not really going to be, we politicos might be bringing this up still, but honestly, I don't know how closely the American people paid attention to this at all, but they will benefit from reforms that lend themselves to actually having policy debates in the House. That can only be to the benefit of the American people, in my view.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's a huge difference between how Matt Gaetz approached this and how Chip Roy approached this.
Yes, absolutely.
Matt Gaetz clearly has personal animus toward McCarthy, clearly did not have very many, substantive objections, and clearly was using this to get on cable TV and then to try to push for himself to be seated on committee. It seems very clear that his objection was far less principled, but Chip Roy apparently has been, pushing for these things for a long time, for months, in conversations with McCarthy. And there was reporting that there was a real shift against McCarthy after a very contentious Tuesday conference call in which he seemed to project a sense that he deserved this, right? Which, to your point about it being an autocratic position, I think that was when a lot of Republicans who maybe would have been in his camp decided instead to join the defectors. And, like I said, I think we agree, it does seem like a lot of good things have come out of it.
Well, thank you very much, Batya. We'll have more Rising in just a minute. Stay with us.